So as you know, the biggest issue at the end of the legislative session was related to education, mayoral control of the New York City school system. And as we have discussed, that's actually still unresolved. While that does impact the state's largest school district, the largest school district in the nation, really, there were plenty of other bills that impacted the other 673 districts in New York, and that includes the Teacher Retirement Reserves Bill. It was a top priority for the State Association of School Business Officials and did not make it through both houses. Here to talk about that and other education issues is the association's executive director, Michael Borges. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight.
Thank you for having me again.
So just let's get the mayoral control thing out of the way first. I mean, the mere fact that it tied everything up means that it does in fact impact upstate. It impacts all districts, really. And also because it was tied up related to charter schools on the Senate side, that gives public education officials pause, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Senate was negotiating with the mayor and others about expanding the cap in New York City, particularly, and so that limits its scope to just the city, not so much outside of.
Well, the cap isn't even close outside the city.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't understand why they're interested. I mean, I was just having this conversation with someone else where I have friends who are Republicans who live in rural parts of the state and suburban, and when I bring up charter schools, they're going, what? So I don't even know why this is even an issue for the Republican base.
Oh, well, because the charter school associations in New York City have given them a lot of money and helped them retain the majority,
talk
obviously.
To just the average general voting Republican, it's like they don't even know what a charter school is. So, for the schools outside, like you said, the 673 was kind of a blah. Of legislative session, and not a lot of our priorities, especially particularly the biggest one, which was getting the TRS Reserve Fund bill done. I want to give a shout out to Assemblyman David Buchwald, who from Westchester. He was the sponsor of it in the Assembly, and this is relatively a new bill.
Yeah, what would it do?
And he got it through the Assembly pretty quickly in 1 year. And basically what it would do was allow school districts and BOCES to create a reserve fund upon which school districts and BOCES can place rainy day funds to cover employer contributions to the TRS reserves. So basically when employer contribution rates or the pension fund expenses go up, school districts have to pay more into the reserves, so into the teachers' retirement system. So like in 2014, 2015, the contribution rate was like 17%. And it's edged down since then, since the economy's gotten better, since Wall Street has gotten better. So the employer contribution rate is tied to how well the economy is doing and how well particularly Wall Street is doing. So when it's doing well, our contribution rates go down. When it's doing poorly, they go up.
Well, okay, a couple of things. Well, first of all, there were years there where there was like zero in the call years, which actually got us into trouble. But that said, I mean, why do you need a separate fund? The only thing I can think of is because the state comptroller has actually slapped some districts on the hand saying they have too much in reserves and they have to spend down some of their rainy day funds. I guess sitting on a lot of money is not a good idea.
Well, in this case, though, we have already back I don't forget how many years ago now, the legislature and the governor allowed us to create retirement systems or retirement reserves for ERS, so people in the state and the local retirement system. So if you're a local government, everybody who works for a local government in the state has a reserve fund for their retirees. We do not. 75% of our employees are in the teachers' retirement system. 25% or less are in the state or the ERS.
So this would enable you to do some financial planning.
Yes. See, what happens was back in 2014, 2015, when the employer contribution rates, when school districts had to spend more money on teachers' retirement, we had to cut programs or lay off staff to afford the large increases in the TRS contribution rates.
Yeah.
So we're trying to plan in advance that at some point that will happen again. The stock market will crash and the economy will tank. Our contribution rates will skyrocket, and then we'll be in the same boat we were.
This is a depressing conversation.
Well, no, but things happen in cycles. I mean,
yes,
and I want to give, again, some kudos, because here the legislature, at least part of the legislature, was being proactive.
Well, what happened in the Senate?
That's a good question, because it got as far as the Senate calendar. I think it was third reading, and it just stalled.
Well, who's against it?
Well, nobody at this point, because the teachers, New York State United Teachers, NYSUT, was at one point had issues with the bill. They negotiated some changes with TRS, the administrators of TRS, upon which NICET actually has representatives on, and they put some caps on how much you could put into it, how long, how many years you could have it in, and I mean, so it's.
And you didn't have any trouble with
no,
any
not
of
at
the
all.
changes
I mean,
made?
they were common sense, and if it makes the bill move, that's fine. So beyond that though, there were other bills that were on our legislative priority list that did get passed. There was one dealing with the collection of school taxes. Here's a no-brainer, right? So if a school district wants to collect its own taxes, it has to get permission from its local government to do so. So here's like a case
Everything
where
rolls downhill, doesn't it?
It
Like
does.
the local government needs permission from the state to continue the extension of its sales tax.
So, it's like we can do it probably cheaper than local government because local governments are allowed by law to charge up to 1% of your school taxes. So if you have a $100 million tax base, and the local government can charge 1%, it's going to generate $1 million in revenue for that local government. Well, it's not going to cost a school district $1 million to collect its taxes. It's going to be done for a fraction, 10% or whatever. So there's that, and then there was a bill dealing with making sure that small school districts in rural parts of the state could stay in.
None of this got done two-way.
Well, the collection of school taxes did get passed by both houses.
So we're waiting for the governor to act on that.
Yes, and then the one dealing with small school districts who belong to health insurance consortiums, that also got passed by both houses of the legislature, and that would help them save money on their health insurance, so that's a good thing. But then there are lots of other bills that would save school districts money or make school districts more efficient that didn't get addressed. Dealing with internal audits, dealing with sharing buses for transportation, dealing with bus driver fingerprinting. I mean,
that one just, these are the kind of things that have to drive you insane.
Yes.
Like the legislation allows the DMV to share fingerprints and background checks of prospective bus drivers with SED to avoid duplicative efforts upon request from a prospective employee. Okay, so now instead of being able to just do it once, you have to do it twice, which takes time, which takes money.
Correct.
It's idiotic.
Yes.
It's idiotic.
Yes.
But you need legislation to fix it?
Apparently, yes, yeah. And then here's another, the one dealing with the shared transportation. Like, so if your school district wants to transport kids in another school district to a similar destination, so say they were going to a private school, a parochial school,
which they're required to provide transportation.
Provide transportation too. They go to another school district which is doing the exact same thing. They both send buses to the same destination. We want to share those buses. Well, there's a disincentive for doing that.
And this doesn't make any sense because the whole thing about shared services is like the governor's touchstone, right? Or one of them.
Believe me, we've been batting heads on this for a while now.
But who's against it? Like, why can't you? What's the big deal?
I don't. Sometimes I think government dislikes change. Unless there's a crisis, they don't enhance, or prefer to have changes. So until there's a crisis, until something happens, they
and
don't
even
act.
when there's a crisis, because mayoral control is about to go into the
we'll wait till the last
garbage
minute.
can, and nobody seems to have a
problem
with that.
Most of our bills are pretty common sense kinds of bills that really would save school districts money and taxpayers money and the state money. And yet they failed to move.
Okay,
so,
but there's speculation now that maybe the assembly will come back midweek.
Well, we can hope. If they're going to do something for New York City, let them do something else for the 673 other school districts in the state that didn't get anything done out of this legislative session.
Actually, when I'm looking at this list, who's really not acting here? It looks kind of like the Senate.
The Senate's been acting on a lot of other of our priorities, which is a good thing, and I want to give credit for them for that. But the top priority was TRS, and that, you got to the cliff, basically. You got the Assembly passed it.
And you've not gotten any explanation of what happened there.
There were some concerns by certain senators, which I will not name, but,
Name them. Why
not?
Shame them.
I won't shame them. But they need to take action. If they're going to come back, deal with New York City, deal with a bill that will benefit every school district in the state and every BOCES in the state. So.
Yeah, it really is actually quite amazing because what we're talking about here is a lot of things upstate. We've been talking about those upstate extenders, like we talked to Albany County Executive Dan McCoy, for example. We talked to Steve Aquario from the Association of Counties last week about the holdup of the holding hostage of these upstate sales tax extenders in exchange for mayoral control because the Assembly doesn't want charter schools, et cetera, et cetera. And yet these things, more or less, everything that didn't move is now being held hostage because the legislature can't get out of its own way on mayoral control.
Right. This is a frustration I think a lot of folks have, is that nothing ever happens for the right reasons, or nothing ever doesn't happen for the right reason. There's no rhyme or reason for a lot of things that
Well, that's
happen.
Planet Albany.
Yeah, that's Planet Albany.
It's
I know.
governed by, there's no gravity.
There's no gravity.
There's no oxygen. It doesn't succumb to the same rules. It's just
it
not
can
governed.
be frustrating for someone who's very logical and just
Well, the
common
worry
sense.
is that they come in and do a quickie sort of a fix, and they do a 1-year mayoral extender, for example, and then they do the extenders for the sales tax, and they drop the charter schools, and then they leave that for another, or whatever they do, and they don't deal with any of the other, forgive me, smaller bore issues, because they're just so desperate to get in and get out.
Right. Well, I mean, how long does it take to pass a bill? If they're going to do one, they can do two.
It depends on how long they debate it, Mr. Borges, as you know.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so it's a shame that they left town without addressing a lot of these other issues that are important to the other 673 school districts that represent.
But who's counting?
Yeah, who's counting?
Thank you very much for your time. And
Yes.
of course, if we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens,
Thank
yeah.
you so much. We do